What's up, Who Dat Nation? Brendan Boylan here of the Saints News Network on SI.com and the Bayou Blitz podcast. Hope you guys are having a great Sunday morning. The New Orleans Saints are traveling to Pittsburgh to take on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this is a game that, every game at this point for New Orleans almost seems like a must win, but this is a really golden opportunity to get back on track against a Steelers team that is really struggling this season and really trying to form a new identity similar to the Saints, as they've had a drastic change at quarterback with Ben Roethlisberger retiring. Obviously started the year with Mitchell Trubisky and are now on to the Kenny Pickett era, who was a first-round pick in April's draft. And for New Orleans, in a similar boat is Drew Brees, now 2 years retired, and the Saints are still trying to figure out their identity without a Hall of Fame quarterback. So really interesting to see what this matchup looks like, and curious to see how these teams move forward in very similar positions. But let's go ahead and jump into the injury report. First off, for all of you regulars wondering, where's Bob Rose? Bob Rose is questionable. He's on our injury report today. He's questionable for the pregame show. He's actually in Pittsburgh today. I was going to say Heinz Field, but that's not right anymore. But for the sake of this, it's Heinz Field. He's sitting there in Pittsburgh. He's in the press box. He's credentialed for today. He's going to be hanging out with Saints News Network John Hendricks, and we'll see if they are able to hop on this morning. Obviously, being at the stadium can get really difficult to find a good spot to hang out and be with us live on the pregame. So Bob Rose questionable. He's doing well, though. Make sure you follow him on Twitter today. He'll be tweeting straight from the press box. But let's look at the injury report. This from Friday. We don't have the official injury report for today quite yet. Ingram, Marshawn Lattimore, Eric McCoy, Andrews Pete, and Pete Warner all ruled out of today's contest. And then Eric McCoy actually moved to IR. He'll miss at least 4 weeks. Questionable for the Saints, Marcus Davenport, Marcus May, Tenio Passanio, and PJ Williams. The good news with that is that it's going to be the return of Jarvis Landry for the New Orleans Saints. So a little bit more receiver help. Obviously, Chris Olave has done a very good job of carrying this Saints receiving corps, because let's be honest, you look at this receiving corps and you compare it to last season, there's not a whole lot of difference. A lot of trouble trying to create separation on routes. A lot of trouble in just outside of Alvin Kamara really getting the offense going. Kamara is going to be healthy. Obviously, he's been really good for the Saints as of late. Outside of last week, the whole offense really struggled. But for me, this game's going to come down to the New Orleans Saints defense against a struggling Pittsburgh offense. You look at what the Pittsburgh Steelers have done so far this year in terms of their passing attack. 31st in points per game as an offense as a whole, but 23rd in passing yards, 29th in passing touchdowns. They're worst in the league. They've thrown 10 interceptions this year. That is a NFL high. They've allowed 21 sacks, and they're not particularly good on third down either at 33.6%. New Orleans' defense has been disappointing this year. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. They're giving up over 25 points per game. They are allowing just under 200 passing yards, which actually puts them in the top 10 in the league. They've allowed 11 touchdowns. I think the biggest thing for a lot of people is the fact that they're not taking the ball away at a high clip. You know, you go and you get Marcus May to replace Marcus Williams, and May and Williams were, the two Marcuses of the free safety market. And you could really take your pick with either one of them. A lot of people were going to say Marcus Williams a little bit better, a little bit younger, and was the guy to pay. So, the Saints let him walk. They bring in Marcus May, who's the second best free safety of the free agent class, and we haven't seen a whole lot there. There's been a lot of people that have not been particularly happy with the play of Tyrann Mathieu and his return to New Orleans. So looking for a little bit more there. And when you have Marshawn Lattimore, who was playing at an all-pro level, if you ask me, miss a significant amount of time this season, I just, you can't expect the secondary to be great, but 31st in interceptions. They only have 2 on the year. They do have 22 sacks, and they are in the top 10 in third down defense. Now, on the rushing side of the ball, this is where Pittsburgh is really struggling, and it's a surprise to a lot of people, myself included. Najee Harris, great young running back, hasn't really found his footing. A lot of the offense is on his shoulders, and he's had some injuries as well this year. But Pittsburgh is second to last in rushing yards per game. They're 27th in yards per carry. And they haven't done a particularly good job of running the ball into the end zone. Only 2 rushing touchdowns on the season. For the Steelers. The Saints' rush defense has been fantastic over the years, and it seems like they've lost a little bit of their identity. They're 19th in yards per game, and they've allowed 9 rushing touchdowns this season. That's been a big concern. If you watch the Bayou Blitz on Wednesdays with me and Bob, or even some of these Sunday broadcasts, I mean, we've talked about a lot how maybe the most disappointing part for the Saints outside of their safety play so far this year has been the interior of the defensive line. There hasn't been a whole lot there for the Saints. David Onyemata, we have been extremely happy with his production over the last couple years, but hasn't really returned back to that Big O form that the Who Dat Nation's used to. And there's still question marks at who's playing beside him and who can emerge out of some of these younger guys, whether it's the Malcolm Roaches or the Shy Tuttles, like who's going to emerge and be the number 2 defensive tackle. So some question marks there, but I do see this as a really good opportunity for the Saints defense, as particularly that defensive line, to get after a guy like Kenny Pickett. The Pittsburgh offensive line might be one of the worst in the league. Pickett's thrown 8 interceptions in 5 games. And I mentioned even before Pickett was playing and they were starting Mitchell Trubisky, I mean, they're last in the league. They've thrown the most interceptions of anyone in the league. They've allowed a lot of sacks. This is definitely a game where a guy like Cameron Jordan, who's going to get a lot of attention, could come out and be a difference maker. It could definitely be a game while Cam Jordan's getting the attention on one side, that the Davenports or the Peyton Turners of the world can make a huge impact. The Saints offense hasn't been lackadaisical, because you look at the statistics and the Saints are, like top 10 in yards per game. They're scoring the ball particularly well outside of last week with Andy Dalton. Coming into last week, the Saints were averaging almost right at 30 points per game under Andy Dalton, and that's without Michael Thomas. That's without Jarvis Landry, who they get back this week. There's a lot of question marks there as to who's going to be that dominant force on the Saints offense. And now you have more question marks because you're going to be without 2 starting offensive linemen. As I mentioned, Eric McCoy out. As I mentioned, Andrews Pete out. And McCoy's going to be on IR for 4 weeks. So I actually wrote about it earlier this week for the Saints News Network and some of my X factors, and it's not a sexy pick, right? I could have easily gone with any of these skill players. Could have went with Alvin Kamara. I could have went with Jarvis Landry making his return this week. I could have went with a guy like Andy Dalton as my offensive X factor, but I picked Cesar Ruiz. And here's why. First, Ruiz got a lot from the Who Dat Nation and analysts, local analysts earlier in the year for just not playing well. And honestly, for the first few seasons of his NFL career, not living up to that first round pick. However, the last couple of weeks, Cesar Ruiz arguably has been the Saints' best offensive lineman. And he's starting to find that footing in his NFL career. He's starting to be a little bit more dominant. There are still some moments, but he's starting to look like the guy that they expected him to be out of Michigan, being selected in the first round. So positive things for Cesar Ruiz. But now here's the thing is, with McCoy being out, Ruiz is going to shift over from guard to center where he played at Michigan. And there's a lot that comes on being a center in the National Football League. I don't think a lot of people truly understand all the responsibility there. I mean, you're the communicator from the inside out of that offensive line. You're the communicator with the quarterback. I mean, your thumbprints as a center are all over this offense. I mean, I know that's a very normal term to use when you're talking about quarterbacks. And especially quarterbacks of great offenses, right? Their thumbprints, their DNA is all over that offense. But a lot of it goes to the center play too. And, when I think about some of the greatest centers over the last, 20 years of the league, I mean, one of them is making his coaching debut today for the Indianapolis Colts. I think of a guy like Jeff Saturday and the relationship he had with Peyton Manning in Indianapolis, and how as much of Peyton Manning's DNA was all over those offenses, it was also Jeff Saturday. And so when I look at a guy like Cesar Ruiz, who's been playing a right guard for the Saints, he's had to come in and play center a little bit. He played center, obviously, last week when McCoy left the game. You're starting to grow into your own. You're starting to be a more dominant force on that offensive line. But now you have to show you can be a leader vocally, lead by example. You have to show everything that you were showing while you were playing right guard and growing into your own. And now you have to do that being the leader of the offensive line. So for the next at least 4 weeks, Cesar Ruiz's role in the Saints offense is going to be so much more crucial to the success of this team, regardless of who plays quarterback. And that's a whole nother conversation for maybe Wednesday on the Bayou Blitz podcast is, should there be a quarterback change? Should it go back to Jameis Winston? Um, he had a great interview this week, exclusive with Mike Triplett as well. And if you haven't read that, I encourage you to read that. I mean, Jameis dropped a lot of knowledge in that interview. So again, Cesar Ruiz's role in this offense is going to be vital, not just this week, but moving forward. Again, looking at the Saints defense, I look at a guy like Cameron Jordan. He's right there at the New Orleans Saints franchise record for career sacks. I don't know if he's going to do it this week, but this is a good opportunity to. It's a good opportunity to have a game that starts getting the ball rolling. I think the big soccer term is, when a goal scores on a drought and he scores one, then the floodgates open. I think it's going to be the same thing for the New Orleans Saints defense. I mean, if the Saints defense can start getting to the quarterback consistently, 1 sack becomes 2 sacks, becomes 3, and then the floodgates open. And all of a sudden you're getting a ton of sacks. Same with turnovers or takeaways. You get 1 interception, you force 1 fumble, before you know it, it's another one and another one, another one. And there's just this confidence that builds. And the Saints have not played like a confident football team, right? They haven't won back-to-back games yet. They've really struggled to find an identity. And this defense was supposed to be so good. So good. If you really want to go through the archives, you can go to saints.media and go all the way back to like July and read what John Hendricks was talking about with the defense at training camp. You can read what Bob Rose and myself and Kyle T. Mosley, everything that we were hearing and everything that the guys that were down there were seeing. It was that this could have been one of the Saints' best defenses ever. You don't want to put them up there with the Dome Patrol. Like, that's a lot of hype. But this could have been one of the Saints' best defenses, not just of recent memory, but it really could have been one of the better defenses the Saints have ever had. And they haven't lived up to that hype. Offensively, do you want to give them a little bit more of a pass? Of course. Nobody projects losing your starting quarterback. Nobody projects losing your starting wide receiver. Nobody projects losing your second wide receiver and your number 1 wide receiver and even Alvin Kamara for a game. And very crucial members of the offensive line as well. I mean, there's been a lot of injuries. There's been more injuries to the Saints team over the last 2 years than I can remember happening to a single team in quite a while. I mean, they've been hit hard by the injury bug. They've been bitten bad by the injury bug, and it continues. So yeah, you want to give the Saints offense a little bit of a wiggle room. You don't want to throw that much on them, but defensively, the hype was real. The hype was very real, and they didn't live up to it, and they haven't lived up to it. Now, taking the ball away does a lot for a defense, and I think it covers up a lot of flaws with a defense. I hate making this comparison, but I mean, if you want to go back to 2009, I mean, the Saints defense was just average across the league, but they were number 1 in takeaways. And that team ended up going to the Super Bowl, winning the Super Bowl. And it was some really crucial takeaways that took them to the Super Bowl. 2 by Tracy Porter, obviously the one in the NFC Championship game. And the one that everybody will remember is the return for a touchdown off of Peyton Manning in the 4th quarter of Super Bowl 44. So, yeah, when you take the ball away, it covers up some of the blemishes other places. And with the offense, I mean, the same thing. I mean, if you put up points and you're winning games, it's going to cover up some of the other blemishes of your team. Unfortunately for the Saints, there hasn't been a lot of positive to cover up some of those blemishes. Now, when you talk about this game in Pittsburgh, I mean, the Pittsburgh defense hasn't been great this season either, but I do want to go ahead and jump on this because it just dropped. The official inactive list per our very own John Hendricks. Let's take a look. Saints ruled out 5 players on Friday. Here's a look at the entire inactive list. and this one hurts. And there's a surprise on here as well. But Marquez Callaway will be inactive for the Saints today. Marcus May will be inactive for the Saints. Mark Ingram, Pete Warner, Marshawn Lattimore, Andrus Peat, J.P. Holtz, and Marcus Davenport. The Saints did call up Jordan Howard and Bryce Thompson from the practice squad. They also signed Josh Andrews to the active roster in place of Eric McCoy. That's a lot that the Saints are missing, and a surprising one in Marquez Callaway, who's going to be inactive. But with Jarvis Landry coming back, I think there had to be a receiver that you didn't call up and was like a healthy scratch. And honestly, as much as I enjoyed what Callaway was able to do for the Saints last season, and I think the expectations even for Callaway last season were pretty high. But the fact that he came in, he contributed well, was a positive thing to see, but he hasn't done that this year. So the Saints are going to go with Olave and Landry and Traquan Smith. They're going to go with Kevin White, and they're going to go with Rashid Shaheed, who I'd love to see more in the offense. And this is definitely a week 2 where a guy like Taysom Hill could make an impact. I mean, look, a week ago, Taysom only touched the ball 2 times. Yeah, you heard me right. Only 2 times that the Swiss Army knife touched the football for the Saints, which is incredible, if you ask me, honestly, because look at all the positives that Taysom has had when the Saints have won football games. The play calling last week was lackadaisical. It was vanilla. It was plain. It was calling a game almost, the way Bob says it, you're calling a game scared. And the Saints need to get back to being aggressive. I mean, the other thing, too, is Jordan Howard, only 1 snap. And some of you guys in the chat last weekend were very excited for what Jordan Howard could bring to a team. I mean, a former Pro Bowl running back. He got 1 snap. And it was Dwayne Washington that saw a lot of the running back 2 snaps. And the Saints were already depleted at running back with not having Mark Ingram. Alvin Kamara only had like 30 rushing yards. It was a season low last week, 30 rushing yards in the game. So you expected to see the Saints try to run the ball and get other people involved, whether it was Taysom Hill, whether it was Jordan Howard, and it didn't happen. This week is going to be vital to do that. I mean, you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers over the last, honestly, you might even say, half a century, 50 years of Steeler football. And what do you think of? I mean, you think of Mean Joe Green, you think of Jack Ham, you think of even some of the more recent guys. You think of the James Harrisons, you think of these hard-hitting dudes. You think about that steel curtain, even in the modern era. That was the Steelers' identity. And that Steelers' identity defensively is just not there. They're going to miss Fitzpatrick today, Minkah Fitzpatrick. They do get TJ Watt back, which is going to be a very interesting matchup to watch, whether Watt is going to be, whether they're going to line him up on Hurst, where are they going to line him up? How many snaps is he going to get, right? He just got activated from IR. And even if he is a guy that only comes in pass rushing situations, I mean, TJ Watt, talk about the Watt brothers. TJ Watt is so good. And he could really, really wreck the Saints offense. So we'll see how that works out too. But this is not a Steelers defense that is as big and bad and aggressive and top of the league as they used to be. So the Saints need to exploit that. And I think a part of that sounds super simple, but establish the run. Hard-nosed runs with Taysom Hill. And Glenn, I totally agree with what you're saying is, don't use him as a decoy. And you compare him to Lamar Jackson. Not my favorite comparison in the world, but I understand what you're saying is Lamar is, Lamar's ability to create things on the ground last week is what helped the Ravens offense. I didn't think the Ravens offense, they weren't spectacular. They weren't putting up a ton of points, but they possessed the ball well. And that's exactly what they needed to do to win the football game. They had 2 drives in the first half that resulted in touchdowns that were over 7 minutes long. So when you think about it that way, The Ravens possessed the ball for almost an entire quarter and came away with 14 points. That's huge. Now, the Saints' offensive identity is not quite the same, but when you're able to play Taysom Hill and you're able to utilize him in so many different looks and be super creative with him, that opens up your offense, not just for Taysom Hill, but for other guys, other playmakers. And it makes it more difficult to cover. And I think that's what the Saints really need to do is utilize him, especially when Mark Ingram's out. And Bob and I have talked about this on the Bayou Blitz for like 2 weeks now, since Ingram got injured, is even when Ingram's healthy, Taysom Hill really gets those running back 2 snaps. And so when you didn't have Ingram healthy and you brought up Jordan Howard and you had Taysom Hill last week, it was a shock to not see Hill and Howard utilized behind Alvin Kamara. Hope the Saints are able to regain some of that running identity and also just make the game easy. Andy Dalton, 35 years old, had some great years with the Bengals. He's actually played well this year. When you look at how he grades out amongst quarterbacks, and he hasn't graded out bad. He hasn't turned the ball over a whole lot. There's a lot of positives for what Andy Dalton has done, but he is a little bit more of a game manager than a gunslinger at this point in his career. And for any quarterback, your best friend is the running game. And Kamara's not a workhorse type of running back. And that was the one thing that I thought the Saints have done a super good job with Kamara over his career. It's so tempting to use Kamara in a way that the Panthers used Christian McCaffrey before they traded him, but you saw what happened to McCaffrey. I mean, you put those type of miles on a Ferrari, and you're going to start having issues with the engine, and that's what happened with McCaffrey. He was getting hurt, and I think the Saints have done an excellent job with Kamara, but you've got to continue that, and you got to find him a running mate, and that's what made him so special those first 3 years of his career, was having Ingram and having that running mate type of deal. Even though Kamara was the star, you still had a guy that could spell him, and I think in this case it's going to be Taysom Hill. Kyle Mott it should be an easy win against the Steelers. Let's be honest. The Steelers are not a good football team, but I'm not going to lie to you guys. The Saints aren't a good football team right now either. And for a lot of people, that's not something you want to hear, especially when that's your team. But just being as true as I can in the analyst chair that I sit in, I mean, they're not a good football team. And Bob and I talked about it on Wednesday. This is a team on paper in Madden, my favorite comparison. Madden-wise, this should be a really good football team. There's a lot of talent all over the place, but injuries, lack of chemistry, there's a lot of things that haven't gone the Saints' way. And at some point, you got to look at the coaching staff. And I don't think that I don't think he's going to be on a chopping block. I don't think he's on the hot seat. Even at the end of the year, if the Saints don't finish well, if the Saints miss the playoffs, I still don't think DA is on the hot seat. But you're seeing the type of culture that the Saints had over the last couple years, even with Sean Payton. I mean, last year's team was so much less talented, and the Saints still probably should have made the playoffs. They're half a game out of the playoffs, and probably should have got there. But this is a much more talented football team, and today against Pittsburgh, like I said at the top, the Saints defense is going to be what makes or breaks this. I do think the Saints offense is going to have opportunities to score the football against a weak Pittsburgh Steelers defense. I mean, fantasy people, you guys know me, right? I love fantasy football, write about fantasy football every week. This team, the Steelers team, is bottom of the league in points allowed to receivers. They're towards the bottom of the league in points allowed to running backs. This is going to be an excellent type of opportunity for guys like Olave, Landry, even a guy like Jawan Johnson, because Minkah Fitzpatrick's not going to play today. The best player in that secondary that has struggled this year is not going to play today for Pittsburgh. I think the Saints offense is going to have opportunities. Obviously, when you're missing 2 offensive line starters, there's going to be some miscommunication. The play calling's got to be on point today. You can't get too complex. You don't want to have a ton of 5-step drops for Andy Dalton. And You want to get it out of his hands quick when he's passing the football. And guess what? When you have a guy like Jarvis Landry coming back, who's perfect in that short and intermediate game, you're going to have opportunities. When you have a guy like Olave, who is good in the route tree at all three levels, you're going to have opportunities to get the ball out quick and get it in the hands of your playmakers. And when you have one of the most dangerous, if not the most dangerous offensive weapon in the league in terms of his versatility in Alvin Kamara, you're going to have opportunities to get the ball out quick and get it to your playmakers. And that's why I think the Saints offense is going to be okay today. I'm not going to say they're going to go score 30 points today, but I think the Saints offense is going to get somewhere in the mid-20s today. It's up to the defense against a bad Steelers offense to, the turnovers would be nice. Like I said, you get one, the floodgates open. Maybe you get five. And you start, I'm not saying 5 in one game, but you start getting one and it starts piling up over the weeks. And before you know it, you've got a lot of turnovers over the course of, or takeaways rather, in the course of a couple weeks. That would be great. And this is a golden opportunity to do that against the Steelers. But more than anything, the Saints just 2 weeks ago shut out the Raiders. And we were all praising the defense. So the defense has finally come around. And I didn't think they played terrible against the Ravens. I think they got defeated, right? Like morally got defeated after the first half because I thought they played pretty well in the first half. But Lamar Jackson being as magical as Lamar Jackson can be, the reason he was the MVP of the league, the reason he's going to be, honestly, he could end up being the highest paid quarterback in the league after this season because he's up for a new contract. All those reasons, I think the Saints got defeated morally. And then the second half happened. And when you're just defeated, it just snowballs. And this is an opportunity for the Saints to morally get back on track, get back to playing the style of Saints defensive football that shut out the Las Vegas Raiders. And it's going to be an opportunity to get the ball rolling in some positive directions for this football team. So those are things I'm looking for out of the Saints. I really think this game comes down to how they play. Now, Pete Warner's not going to play. That's a big miss. Davenport's not going to play. That's a big miss. And Marcus May's not going to play. Excuse me. Big misses. You're missing key contributors at all three levels: defensive line, linebacker, and secondary. Now, PJ Williams is going to play. And obviously, a guy like Justin Evans has got plenty of snaps on the Saints defense today to play in that spot for Marcus May. But it's concerning that May's missed a lot of time. And anytime you have new faces to a secondary and communication and chemistry and what have you, when you miss time consistently, that chemistry and that communication doesn't grow the way it needs to. That's concerning moving forward for the Saints. Now, Pete Warner, what can you say? He's had a standout season. I think he's had a very quiet, in terms of the national media, a very quiet standout season for the Saints. And he's been really good. And he's been towards the top of the league in solo tackles. He's really showing some of that versatility. And, he's proven a lot of people wrong, myself included. I thought the Saints, reached a little bit. I didn't think he was a great fit in the second round of the draft. But, for the last 2 years, he's really proved me wrong to be a really quality piece for the Saints defense. And then you have a guy like Davenport who, when healthy, can be a huge contributor. Opposite of Cameron Jordan. Now, it's a lot of those snaps are going to go to the Grandersons of the world and the Peyton Turners of the world and see what they can do. And Turner had 2 sacks just 2 weeks ago. So, yeah, you're missing pieces and guys got to step up. If anything, I'm a little bit more concerned about the linebacker depth for the Saints. Caden Ellis, who is a guy that has really worked his way onto this roster and worked his way into getting some quality snaps for the Saints. He's going to have to step up big in the role that he's going to play. And whether it's PJ Williams or whether it's Justin Evans, whoever's going to be playing at free safety today is going to have to step up big too, because those are some big shoes to fill. Now, again, you're playing a young Kenny Pickett, and he struggled turning the ball over, but anytime you miss big pieces, it doesn't matter. There's a reason Pickett was picked in the first round. There's a reason that he took some of the NCAA by storm a couple of years ago. Obviously, everybody remembers that fake slide where he was able to fake the slide and score in that bowl game. But, he's a super talented kid. The Steelers obviously see him as the franchise. And, you roll with the punches when you're a team like Pittsburgh, and you have to with young guys. But the last thing you want to see is a guy like that eat up a Saints defense. And I know you loyal Who Dat Nation fans, you know all about young quarterbacks eating up the Saints defense. I don't have to say RG3, do I? we can go through a list. It's not that great looking for the black and gold, but the black and gold have a good chance against the black and yellow. Now the Steelers, if they're able to utilize Najee Harris the right way, he's able to pick up some big yards. They're able to run the ball well, and Pickett's able to get into a groove, whether it's on play action, short passes. It's going to be a long day for the Saints. So as weird as it sounds, the Saints need to make the Steelers one-dimensional, make them throw the ball, make Kenny Pickett beat you. We'll see if the Saints are able to do that. That's all the time we have for the Bayou Blitz pregame show. Again, Bob Rose was questionable, and I guess now officially out of the pregame show. He's up in Pittsburgh with our very own John Hendricks with the Saints News Network. They are hanging out in the press box, getting ready for kickoff, which is about an hour away. I will be back for a very brief halftime show, give you guys a little bit of update of what was going on in the first half. Until then, make sure you go over to Twitter and you follow the Bayou Blitz on Twitter at Bayou Blitz Pod. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at BT Boylan. And most importantly, next Wednesday, Bob and I have a super, super special guest. Give you guys a hint. Former New Orleans Saints quarterback will be joining us on the Bayou Blitz on Wednesday. Super excited for that. Hope you guys are as well. So make sure that you are looking out for that live podcast and follow us over on Twitter for the updates, again, at Bayou Blitz Pod. Until then, find your peace, spread love, practice positivity, enjoy the first half, and we'll see you at halftime.